period power, harnessing the power of female physiology. So this has been developed by me through a period of observation and trial and error when it came to myself and some of the female athletes that I work with. So it's not just for women. It's open to absolutely everybody, and the intention for me behind this is to try and open the conversation for all athletes and coaches. So if you are a female athlete with a male coach, I want to be able to give you some topics that you can go to your male coach with and hopefully open a conversation with them on this. And if you are a male coach, I want to give you some tools which will help you have this conversation with your female athletes. Okay, so who am I? I am Laura Salmon. I am a mindset coach. I am an athlete. I am a CrossFit coach. I've been a CrossFit coach for over 6 years. I've been a personal trainer for over 4 years. And I've been mindset coaching for about the same length of time. I work with athletes of all abilities, all levels, and in all different disciplines, not just CrossFitters. So I've had a decent piece of insight into how female physiology affects so many people in so many ways over so many different parts of their life. So I hope that you will get some benefit from my experiences here. So why are we here? Hopefully, we're all here voluntarily, and it's to learn about how to harness the power of female physiology by utilising different tools at our disposal. So we're going to cover today things like cycle tracking and the value that it can offer, understanding the hormonal landscape. So gaining knowledge about how the hormonal landscape works, the ups and downs of it, also the dangers of cycle dysfunction. We're going to touch on mindset and mood, how they affect and how they differ, and the various different stages of the cycle. After we've been through all the basics, we're going to then look in a little bit more detail at how to synchronise nutrition for performance and recovery. We're going to look at supplementation alongside that. We're going to try and understand what happens to the cycle as a lady ages, and then we're going to touch on useful pieces of information, hopefully give you some more areas that you can look and research when we look at key players in the development of this field. And I'm going to try and share as much information with you as possible so that you can continue to do your own reading up and research and look into this in the areas that suit you and interest you most. So, terminology that's going to be used during this presentation. Hormones, we're definitely going to talk about those. They're a huge factor. Hormones that we're going to talk about most are estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. There will be some others mentioned in there, but these are the ones which are going to be the main focus. We're going to look at menstrual phases. So we're going to look at follicular, ovulatory, luteal. When I talk about females, I just want to be clear here. When I refer to females in this presentation, I am talking about biological females. Now, absolutely anybody can follow a method of cycle syncing. There are tricks and tools to be able to do that, regardless of who you are, how you identify, or where you are in your life cycle and hormonal cycles. However, when I'm referring to the stages of the cycle and hormones, I'm talking about biological females, just so there's no confusion. Okay, so let's get cracked on with it. Let's get into it. Menstruation is not solely a female issue. This could not be more true. So 50% of the world are biologically female. That is an average generalization. just an example of, yes, at different times the population sways one side more to the other. There might be more males in a certain demographic than females. However, generally speaking, it's about a 50-50 split if we average it out. So, saying that, if 50% of the world are biologically female, that means we either are, we know of, live with, are the son, daughter, mother, cousin, brother, sister of a menstruator. That's an awful word. I will try not to use that again. It does sound pretty awful. However, it is extremely descriptive. So, menstruation and the female body. Just want to explain a little bit about the issues and differences that are going to come up. So, a woman's hormonal landscape is very changeable over the course of her cycle. Now, a typical cycle, we've all been taught to understand, is this cycle that we see here of approximately 28 days in length. So if you have ever come into contact with the contraceptive pill as a method of contraception, you are usually prescribed a packet which has 21 tablets in it, and you are told to take the tablets for 21 days and then take a break for 7 days, or that's how it used to be. So that's where it comes into it being an average of 28 days. It was just quite a simple method to regulate. So is that normal? Is that actually normal? We're talking about it as an average, and that tends to be the baseline that everybody works on. However, only 16% of women actually have periods that fall within that median of 28 days. So if that isn't the truth, if that isn't a fact that, you know, we should all expect to have a 28-day cycle, what is normal? So a normal cycle, and I use the word normal quite loosely because we are all a case study of one. A normal cycle can be anywhere between 21 days and 35 days. This is entirely dependent on age and individuality. There do seem to be trends that are followed here. So women who are under the age of 40 and in the peak of their fertility tend to have shorter cycles. So they may be under the 28 days and closer to the 21 days. However, as a woman ages up, those cycles tend to elongate. So the closer you are to and over 40, those cycles may begin to get longer and edge out more towards 35 days and upwards of that. So women have 2 cycles based on the average median hormonal cycle, menstrual cycle. So men only have to concern themselves with one cycle, which is a circadian cycle. We all know what this is. The sun comes up in the morning, it moves across the sky, it sets in the evening, the moon comes out, a whole day, 24 hours, there or thereabouts. Circadian cycle. So all of us, men, women, we all have to live by this cycle. However, women also have a second cycle, and that is where this approximation of 28 days comes from, and it's known as the infraradian cycle. So bear in mind that as we go on through this presentation, I am going to come back and touch on this. I just want you to get used to the language. Okay, so question here. Do you track? Do your athletes track? Is this something that is commonplace with you, your athletes, your friends? Do you track your menstrual cycle? So tracking cycle can be a source of great power and knowledge because physiology affects absolutely every area of your life. You may already be aware of this. I'm hoping so. And that's why you're here, because you want to learn more about it. So areas of your life that are touched by the changes in physiology caused by our hormones. Nutrition, training, concentration, coordination, sleep, recovery, that is just such a small slither of the areas that are actually touched by it. There are so many more areas that is such a big topic. So these are just the main ones that research, the limited amount of research that there is out there, have actually focused on and found commonality in quite readily. So tracking, knowing all of this, knowing how many changes can be affected by our physiology, tracking can really empower you to take control and be able to synchronize with the cycle. So the idea behind synchronizing with your cycle is that an athlete will no longer be ambushed by their moods. They'll be able to train they'll be able to fuel for their training effectively. So training will not be affected. Also helping recovery. So training and recovery are very closely linked with nutrition. We all know that. Another bonus of synchronizing with cycle is being able to manage those pesky food cravings. So at certain times of the month, especially if we are in a calorie deficit, it becomes incredibly difficult to stick with that calorie deficit. So we're going to look at ways and means that we can help ourselves there and help our athletes, and being able to plan training according with that hormonal landscape. So being able to get the most out of training and adapt. Okay, so tracking, how do we track? We've already talked about the importance of it. So what does it mean? How do we track? Anybody who's familiar with tracking, fantastic. Anybody who is not familiar with tracking, this is just a quick whistle stop tour. So tracking, there are many different avenues available and methods of doing this. It's entirely suited to what works best for you. So there are manual trackers. This that you will see on the screen right now is a visual cycle tracker, as called because you can visually see where you are in the cycle by utilizing the number of days, perhaps putting the date in there so you can plan out into the future. You can color code it, you can put words in there, you can use a key. However you choose to use this, there are a million ways to use it. I've actually stolen this from Maisie Hill from her Period Power Pack. She gives it away on her blog and website for free. It's one of her fantastic tools. I suggest you go and have a look and investigate if you've never seen anything like this before. There are also other ways that are semi-manual. So you can use a spreadsheet if you're a bit data minded. That is a really simple and effective way to keep track of your cycle, just using a spreadsheet. You can use a developed app. Developed apps are very popular at the moment purely because everybody's got a phone and they are quite intuitive and do a lot of the hard work for you. We're going to come on to developed apps shortly. Lastly, my suggestion is a calendar. Tried, tested, old-fashioned, yes. However, if it worked for your mum and your grandmother, it will work for you. It's dead simple, dead easy, dead accessible. So developed apps. Here we go. These are a couple of examples of ones that I have actually used myself. So on the left, you will see the Wild AI app. This has been developed by athletes for athletes, by female athletes for female athletes. So I mentioned, and I will mention a couple of interesting characters in the field who have really helped with my research and contributed to things like this. One of them that's going to come up quite often is Dr. Stacey Sims. She's one of the brains behind Wild AI. Wild AI, as I said, developed by athletes. So Stacey Sims is a triathlete. She's won several Ironmans. She's also a sports scientist, and she has a PhD in female physiology studies and numerous other things. She's such a brain. This has been developed in a quest to try and help athletes manage and predict and get the best out of their cycle. So very intuitive, very easy to use. You put in tracking data, it comes up with a whole host of useful suggestions and information and tells you ways that you can amend your training. It talks about what you can expect, how your body may be responding at this time, and also suggests supplementation depending on the symptoms that you have. So I found this really intuitive, really useful. And if you are an athlete just getting started, this is a great place to go with it. Flow Living on the right hand side. So the Flow app, you may well have seen this. This is quite popular on the App Store. It can be accompanied by a book by Elisa Vitti called In the Flow. It's all linked in together, the Flow Collective. Really, really good. This is more of a lifestyle choice and option. So if you have clients that are not at an athlete level, but are still interested in tracking and sharing data, this is a great option. It also incorporates all areas of life. So it looks at how you plan your diary, things that you do outside of the gym, social life, such and so on like that. So it's really useful as well to have a bash with lots of different apps and find one that's comfortable for you. There's also another option which I haven't included on here, and it's called Fitter Woman. It's part of the Fitter group, which if you are a coach and have used Fitter to help with programming and things like that for your athletes, it could be something of interest to you. Definitely give it a try. That's really good at shareable information between athlete and coach. One of the things that I am going to just point out when it comes to developed apps, there is a big difference between this that I'm recommending here and what can commonly be found as a fertility tracker. So a fertility tracker is exactly what it says. These are more of cycle trackers that then encourage you to also track training and activity. So horses for courses, whatever it is you're wanting to use, but just be aware there are two very different sides of these apps available when you look on the App Store. Okay, so what to track. If you're not using a developed app that tells you what to track, how do you know what to track? How can you help your athlete track? What hints and tips can you give them? What kind of data can you expect to receive from your athletes, your clients? So we can track ovulation by tracking basal body temperature. I'll come on to why that's important later, but there is a very simple and easy method to doing that. Tracking things like appetites, craving, how your nutrition is actually going, tracking things like PMS symptoms, looking at mood changes, including body image changes, so the perception of how body image might change, as well as also the physical changes, because there will be some of those. If any training load adaptations have had to be made, track that. Track any obvious changes in things like strength, cognitive ability. There will be changes in dexterity and coordination. I promise you, once you start tracking, you'll be amazed what you recognise is changing. You will notice all sorts of things. If you get your athlete to share, it will explain a lot when it comes to things like certain times in the month I become quite uncoordinated and my dexterity is a little bit off, so I struggle with snatching. I don't execute that quite as well. I get whipped to shit doing double unders at times, and I can be quite clumsy, so there is a pattern to it, but I only recognize that because I track. Anything else as well that you or your athlete feel is useful to track? That it's better to have more information than necessary than nowhere near enough information and be still using guesswork. Okay, big warning here. It's not actually a warning, it's more of just an attention grab. Basically, nobody escapes hormones. We all have them. Women, regardless of whether they are on hormonal contraception or not, they are going to have hormones, and they are going to have the ebb and flow of various different hormones across the month. Contraception is not a blocker. It doesn't stop the production of all hormones. What usually happens is synthetic hormones are introduced into the body that act like pre-existing natural hormones that the body produces. So it also can give you side effects. Anybody who has actually opened a pill packet and opened that little booklet that you get sandwiched in there that takes up half the box, open it out, you could probably paper your entire carpet with that booklet and with its really teeny tiny writing, and at least 70% of it is side effects. So worth knowing what you're getting yourself into, because the doctor certainly, before they prescribe it, does not go into any detail about how the pill does actually affect you. So yes, contraception, hormonal contraception can regulate the period. It does fix in inverted commas things like irregular periods. It can help with having bad skin, quite bad PMS, really heavy periods, irregular periods, things like that. However, there are also other things that come with it. So as well as regulating ovulation and limiting the amount of activity that goes on in the womb in preparation for and after the extremely fertile window has passed, it can suppress other hormones and make them act uncharacteristically. So by doing that, what I mean is it produces an unnatural landscape. Things like ambition, motivation, creativity, and enjoyment can also be affected, as well as being able to regulate PMS symptoms like anxiety, anger, just the general upsetness and discomfort and all that goes along with the latter half of the cycle. By reducing the emotional impact of those hormones in one area, it also numbs it across all other areas. So this is why the general conception, and there is a myth around, oh, I'm on the pill, I don't get that. You probably do, and if you don't track, you're just unaware of it, but you will get it. It may just be a little bit more subtle. In very extreme cases, side effects can be things like depression, suicidal thoughts, and there can be very physical side effects as well, like high and low blood pressure. So it's worth knowing everything about the pill or the hormonal contraception that you are taking. That could be the injection, that could be the implant, that could be an IUD. I'm not saying don't use hormonal contraception in any way, shape, or form. That is not my intention here. What I am saying is be very aware that there are side effects that do affect all aspects of you physically, mentally, and emotionally, not just the things that we ask for. It does come, it's a big mixed bag, and it's different for everyone. So just be aware, do the research, go into it with your eyes open. Okay, another cheery topic. I promise this is the last one where I'm going to harp on about something which is not the best, but it's something that I would be remiss if I didn't discuss in a little bit of detail. So Red S and the female athlete triad. Relative energy deficiency in sport. If anybody has done any kind of sport science or has come into contact with an education establishment and they've studied sport at all, you will have gone over this, but I'm going to go over it again for anybody who isn't familiar. So basically, Red S and the female athlete triad, they're pretty much the same thing. The female athlete triad was renamed Red S a few years ago and given a new a new description. So basically it means the body is not taking in enough energy to meet the demands placed on it by the amount of exercise being performed. Basically, it's reduced energy availability. Summarizing that, more exercise than food. And that does sound like the ideal because everybody's like, oh, calorie deficit. However, taken to an extreme or even slightly more over a prolonged period than is necessary has quite serious consequences. It can lead to things like fatigue, weight loss, amenorrhea, which is the absence or abnormal periods, menorrhagia, which is extremely heavy periods, and it can also impact things like bone density. Now, that doesn't sound like anything all too serious. However, once amenorrhea sets in, it can take years to correct and rectify and get healthy periods back. So something that I really do encourage athletes to be aware of in their teammates or anybody that they work out with. If anybody's period goes missing, it's a red flag. The reason why I say that is it's a perfectly normal, natural bodily function. And the only time really it should go missing is if you are in absolute mortal danger, like you are starving to death. So the history behind that is years ago when food was scarce and we didn't have modern farming and whatnot, if there was a drought, if the crops failed and there was a scarcity of food, we couldn't possibly produce a human and keep it alive and well fed without sacrificing ourselves. So our bodies knew this. As soon as our body fat got below a certain amount, and as soon as it started struggling, it would shut down the reproductive system from stress to try and protect us, to try and keep us alive. Red S is pretty much that response. However, we're not starving, we're not in mortal peril. So it is a big warning sign. Definitely something that should be looked into if you have an athlete that has very irregular or absent periods. Mindset versus mood. Okay, so emotional reactivity does affect mindset. Mindset and mood aren't the same thing. I know a lot of people like to think they are. No. So PMS can magnify stresses and problems at different points of the cycle. So anything that has been going on in the background over the course of a month may have been easy to deal with, keep a handle on, and then when it comes to PMS time, it's unmanageable and unwieldy and it can get a little bit too much. That is thanks to hormones. So the ability to regulate emotional reactivity is diminished by our female physiology for between 7 and 11 days every month in the late luteal phase. Okay, so there is a reason for this, and it is the interaction of different hormones. I'm going to come on to which hormones and how and why. We're going to break it down and go into some detail on that soon. But just making you aware that training may need adaptations based on these fluctuations also, because as far as mindset and mood go, mood is one thing. However, mood can dictate mindset. So mood is how we feel. Mindset is basically what we think about how we feel. So if we feel rubbish, but we are also thinking, my God, I feel really rubbish and I'm not very happy about this, it's not a great situation to be in. Also, it can be real effort that needs to be adapted for at this point. So if you think 1 week you can go in, you can lift a certain weight or you can hit a certain target and it feels like maybe a 7 out of 10, when it gets to PMS time, you might go to do exactly the same workout, exactly the same lift, and it may feel like a 9 out of 10. Nothing's changed, the weight hasn't changed, however, your physiology has changed, so it's harder. And we will come on to why exactly in a little bit. Okay. Cookie Monster, this guy, we all, as a female, will recognize this as an actual mood. Okay, so Cookie Monster, 7 to 11 days before we get our period as a woman, our ability to commit to diet and training is much more impaired, and we require adaptability. This guy will pop out. So there's a reason why it's so predictable. And I'm sure every woman has a story about the week before or the week of her period, she's ravenous and needs to sew her mouth shut. I've said that many times myself. So, reasons being, first half of the cycle, the follicular phase, the appetite is naturally suppressed, and we'll come on to why that happens. But for now, you just need to know that in that first half of the cycle, pre-ovulation, protein and fat is accessed quite easily by the body, which means that we are more satiated. We are actually, in fact, less hungry because of the way that we process different types of food. So in the second half of the cycle, after ovulation, our appetite does actually increase in the luteal phase. There is actual science for the physiological change here. So after ovulation, our body, whether we like it or not, is preparing for the potential of a fertilized egg and then to be able to gestate. So it's working a little bit harder. Remember I said about tracking that basal body temperature to track for ovulation? Our body temperature actually increases around ovulation. For anywhere for 2 to 3 days, our body temperature will go up ever so slightly. So we run a little bit hotter, but then there's an awful lot of things going on internally to try and get that preparation for potential gestation nice and comfortable. So because our body is actually working harder and burning hotter, we do need 90 to 120, excuse me, calories per day more in carbs, especially around training. So when we say 90 to 120 calories, things that spring to mind are a small chocolate bar, a bag of crisps, something that's got high salt, high fat, high sugar. These are the things that we crave. That's why, because our body's working harder. We're not imagining it, we are actually hungrier. So it makes it harder to stick to our nutrition protocol at this time, because if we're in a calorie deficit, if we're in a calorie deficit of 200 calories a day, and then we're needing an extra 90 to 120 calories a day, that's a 350 calories a day-ish deficit that we're in. We are going to be starving. So we need to be considerate of this. We need to understand this. So there is a hack that I'm going to share with you about being able to consider calories over a different time frame than we usually would if we were a male, which means that we can help hopefully mitigate some of those sabotages and binges that we can be prone to at this time. So I'll explain that shortly. First, what we're going to do is break down the different phases of the cycle. So days 1 to 5, this is the very, very early part of the cycle. So you may be aware, you may not be aware, but the first day of a woman's cycle is when she starts to bleed. So that is day 1. Days 1 to 5, that's when we consider it that we're on our period. We can feel a lot like this guy, carrying the world on our back. We're slow, sluggish, low mental cognition, tired, a little bit crampy, generally not feeling great and ideal. Some women, however, feel like an instant relief as soon as they start bleeding. Some can take a couple of days for that to work through the system. It all depends on how much hormones and how we feel. So days 1 to 5, the menstrual phase, potentially not feeling great, potentially not performing just as great either. Day 6 to 14. Okay, there is a reason why we have Beyonce on our screen right now. And this is because Beyonce represents estrogen. Okay, so we are now in the follicular phase. So this is the follicular phase proper. This is party time. This is the best time of our cycle. That is the bit where after you've finished your period as a female, you're all of a sudden not bloated anymore. You're starting to look like yourself. You're starting to feel like yourself. So estrogen begins to rise in this period. So between 6 and 14 days, estrogen is slowly rising and we are feeling better and better and better as time goes on. We become more focused and driven. This is the time that we can set goals and get after them. This is the time when we can start ramping up intensity. We feel stronger, we're more sociable, we're more creative. I will segue a little bit into a little bit of a lifestyle bit of advice here. So if this is the party time and we are feeling fantastic and sociable, we are more likely to fill up our social calendar with dates and commitments of things to do. Be mindful of that, and I will come on to why. Okay, days 15 and 16, eggs. You see what I did there? We are ovulating. So this is a period in time when a female athlete is going to ovulate. When I mentioned earlier about tracking that basal body temperature, I said our temperature actually rises at this time. That is thanks to the luteinizing hormone releasing a follicle. Our body temperature goes up between 0.3 and 0.6 of a degree. It doesn't feel or sound like an awful lot on its own. However, as human beings, that can, especially at different times of the year, that can be quite a big effect. So, ladies, that beginning part of your cycle when you feel fine and the aircon's at the right temperature in the office, excellent. And then that couple of days when you are absolutely red hot, yes. And then your temperature drops off. And everybody's like, oh, put the heating on. You are actually right. You're not imagining it. It's a real genuine thing. We do feel it quite deeply. So yeah, watch out for that basal body temperature going up and down. That is a sign of ovulation. This is also the time of the cycle when we get the most meager and only little squirt of testosterone available to us. Unlike guys who have plenty of testosterone floating around all the time, and that's what makes them big and strong and aggressive, this is our time to shine when it comes to strength. So we need to make the most of this time. This is the peak of our strength. So if you're going to go for any 1-rep maxes, now is the time to test them. This is also a time where you may experience a little bit of middle pain, and that is as the follicle is released. And amazingly, this is our cognitive peak, and it is to do with the combination of estrogen and testosterone working together. So if you have anything new that you need to learn at this point, do it. Around ovulation is the time that you are most likely to be able to pick up new skills. Okay, we're on the downhill now. So post-ovulation, the luteal phase begins days 17 to 28. Angry, shouty face woman. We recognise her, right? Everybody has been on the receiving end of this at some point or has turned into them. So if you're a male coach coaching female athletes, you may recognise this. This is really the bit where we need to be looking at adaptation the most. So if the follicular phase was the party, this luteal phase, especially the latter part, is the hangover. So estrogen has peaked, we've ovulated, we've had a squirt of testosterone. Now estrogen is dropping off quite rapidly and progesterone is on the rise. So due to those changes, we can feel a lot less capable. Recovery is diminished, appetite is increasing, and our emotions become increasingly more changeable. The last 5 to 7 days of this is the period immediately before menstruation, and this is when estrogen has completely dropped off and we are quite high on progesterone, and that is when PMS symptoms are most likely to be prevalent. Okay, so just to break up this a little bit and give you a bit more insight as far as some of the language we're going to use around nutrition goes, this slide should help a little bit. So I am a big fan of food before supplementation. So I would prefer to eat as widely as possible and as well as possible before resorting to supplementation. Now, this is an entirely personal thing. This is what I do try to promote with my clients. However, if you are vegetarian, vegan, or have allergies or a restrictive diet for any reason, supplementation is 100% a way to go. If you can eat it, if you can get it from a natural food source first, please try that. However, there are extenuating circumstances where supplementation cannot be avoided, and I'll explain some of the areas that I do recommend supplementation on. Okay, so first things first, I just want to explain a few issues around diet and nutrition and the difference between men and women. So I don't know if you are already aware, this could be something that's already been discussed with you at some point in time, but modern diets, just like the majority of modern medication, is based on studies done on men. So medical studies and studies around diet and exercise have mainly been done on mostly men in the study group, for a number of reasons. So back in the 1920s and 30s, when they started doing medical studies, they did do mixed groups of medical studies, and they would take males and females and do a medical study. And then when they came to analyse the data, they discovered that women were all over the place and completely skewed the data, whereas men were pretty good and would all fall into an expected tolerance of variation. So you know what they did with women? Just chucked us in the bin. They'd stopped including us. They put us in the too hard basket, and that was it. So medical studies were then only based on men and postmenopausal women when it got to the 60s and up. And it's only been since the 1990s that women have started being reintroduced into medical studies groups. So be very aware that when recommendations are made and there has been a clinical study, just check when that clinical study was done. If it was done prior to 1995, there's every likelihood there was not a single woman in that study, and therefore it's a bit of an experiment if you're a woman and planning on taking any medication or starting a diet or protocol. That being said, there are some differences that we can take into account and utilise to our benefit. So on a regular diet and nutrition protocol, quite often it's recommended to look at your calories over the course of a day and also a week. Reason being, you can tweak your calories over the course of a week and save up, bank, whatever. If you have, say, a big night out coming, a meal out, something like that coming up at the weekend, you can reduce your calories, say, for example, by 100 every day over the course of the week, and then you can have an absolute blast at the weekend. Eat the burger, eat the fries, have a few beers, whatever. That's great. That works fantastically for men. But as we mentioned right back at the very beginning, women also have an infraradian cycle to consider, as well as the circadian cycle. So we need to look at women over a slightly different period. So rather than doing it over a 7-day period of just a week, we would then take that and look at it over a month, so a 28-day average cycle. So knowing full well that our appetite is naturally suppressed in the follicular phase, we can then reduce our calories there. And then when it comes to the luteal phase, when we're that little bit more hungry, we then have built up a buffer. So it's much easier to tweak and stay in line with nutrition if we look at it that way. So let's look at this month that's on the screen. This breaks down into a little bit more detail and gives some suggestions for the phases that I've just discussed. So things like days 1 to 7, there are lower calorie needs, as I've discussed. Higher carb when it comes to training, taking omega-3s, making sure that iron is not deficient at this point, because obviously bleeding, menstruating, losing iron, and also keeping vitamin C nice and high, so plenty of fruit and veg. Give suggestions about exercise. It says strength training. You can start introducing more challenging workouts as and when you feel better. Then when we're looking like more towards the latter part, up towards the ovulatory peak in the center of our cycle, our calorie needs are still quite low in comparison, so we can take advantage of that. Again, strength training, start bringing up the intensity. And then around ovulation, really go hard on the strength training, keep the intensity high, make full use of the anabolic properties of testosterone and estrogen working together. At this point, though, as the hormones are beginning to really shift, it's a good idea to make sure that whole grains, colourful fruits and vegetables are on that menu a little bit more often, because that will help shifting those hormones through the body. Days 15 to 21, again, the calorie needs do start going up now. So this is when we need to start focusing on that lower carb, however, healthier fats. Trying to keep high protein, keep that fiber nice and high, keep that going. Again, if the intensity is starting to become a problem, start looking at lower intensity, steady state kind of stuff. Now, depending on the sport that you're in, and depending on what your training looks like in season, out of season, what you have in store for your athletes, this is purely a suggestion. This is based very much on lifestyle. If I took this to my coach and I was like, yeah, I can only do yoga in my last few days, my coach would be like, get out. Don't talk to me. You are taking the piss. However, it's all relative. So what I consider to be too hard to do in the last 5 to 7 days of my cycle may be easy for somebody else, or what somebody else finds really easy, I could find far too difficult, or I could find even easier. It's entirely relative, and it's dependent on your athlete's level of fitness and how they feel at the time. So that, again, this is just a suggestion, and this is how you could get it to look if cycle syncing was an option. So food over supplements first, as I've said. Eat the micronutrients from natural sources as much as possible. So omega-3s can be got from seafood, nuts and seeds, iron, leafy green veg, making sure we're eating plenty of beans, dried fruits, things like that. We all know where to get healthy fats from these days. They've had a massive resurgence. So I don't think that I'm not trying to teach you to suck eggs. I'm sure you're all pretty au fait with these things. I am going to mention high tryptophan foods though, because that does get mentioned again a bit later. So that can be found in things like turkey, chicken, pork, eggs, oatmeal, tofu. There's something for everybody in there, and it's possible to eat it as an alternative to just having a post-workout shake. So you'll understand why I've highlighted that in a little while. So let's have a little look of how women are not small men. So Dr. Stacey Sin's message mentioned her earlier, and I can only recommend her books and her work really highly. So this is something that I will come on to at the end. But one of the big differences in women not being small men, even though we've been encouraged to eat like men, train like men, we are not small men. Just some of the things that I've covered in this seminar to now makes it really obvious that there are some quite stark differences. Other differences as well are things like popular trends. So one of the popular trends at the moment, and it has been for a few years, is intermittent fasting. So remember I said about medical studies, clinical studies only being performed with mostly men. Intermittent fasting is one of those. Works fantastically on men. Men respond really, really well to intermittent fasting and can do it for a very long time with great results. Women, however, recent studies have started coming out and it's a different story for us. So for short bursts, it can be quite a useful tool. However, intermittent fasting, when used over long periods, long and sustained periods, does increase cortisol production. So cortisol is the stress hormone. An increased amount of cortisol in the body from any source. So it can be from actual stress, or it can be from things like intermittent fasting, lack of sleep, things like that. It's known as chronic stress, and chronic stress stimulates fat storage. How sad, right? So fat storage stimulation, overstimulated fat storage, that results in reduced metabolic function, which means our metabolism slows down and stops working quite as efficiently. And then when that happens, more fat storage is stimulated. And then when that happens, our metabolic function reduces a little bit. And so you can see it's a bit of a negative feedback loop, and if left unchecked and for a long period, and especially for people who are predisposed, that can affect thyroid function, which completely messes up your endocrine system, and all of your hormones do go haywire. So intermittent fasting, even though very popular, yes, can be a useful tool over a short period, a few weeks at a time. However, I wouldn't recommend it long term. Another way that women are not small men and slightly different is the way that our guts actually work. So I have read a book and used it quite intensively with myself and with my athletes on this topic, and it's called Gut, and it's by a lady called Julia Enders. She's a German lady. It is a book written in English, and if you just said a few years ago, I'm going to recommend a book to you about gut health, and you are going to be gripped by it, it's a page turner, I would have thought you were talking nonsense. However, it really is, and I can't recommend it highly enough. So I will come on to that at the end. However, what she does say, and what I have learned and what I have applied for my athletes and myself, is high fiber diets in females, especially females as they age up towards perimenopause and menopause. It helps move excess hormones out of the body. What we don't want is too much hormone floating around the body, wreaking havoc. So the more fiber in the diet, the better your body is going to respond. Also, having a high fiber diet means that you have a healthy microbiome. Now, this applies to men and women, but especially to women when it comes to hormone and hormone regulation and hormone production. So a healthy microbiome affects your mood. So it connects the two brains in the body. So we have our brain, and then we have our stomach brain, and that has come out in science over the last few years, that our second brain, our gut, is just as important, if not more so, when it comes to hormone production than our brain and our head. However, they speak to each other. So a happy brain and a happy stomach makes for a happy body. And it can actually combat depression and anxiety, having a high fiber, well-balanced diet with a happy microbiome. It can also improve immune system function. And who doesn't want a fully functioning, very happy immune system? Because we're going to recover faster, we're going to stay healthier for longer, we're going to be less prone to infections and things like that. So how do we get that? whole and fermented foods, so pre and probiotics. If you are a female, and especially if you have a female athlete or are a female athlete and are struggling with hormone regulation and irregular periods, sorting this and really spending time focusing on this can really take big steps. So whole and fermented foods, pre and probiotics, they are a great starting point. I did mention it earlier, I'm going to come on to it again. Tryptophan. High tryptophan foods, as far as your body and your gut goes, your gut loves tryptophan because it's an essential amino acid and it helps support hormone production and regulation. So eating chicken and turkey and tofu and oatmeal is great. It's great for your stomach. It's great for your hormones. Okay, so there are so many resources out there, so many resources, and I have only touched on a fraction of the ones that are available. Stacey Sims, she is, as I've said, a scientist and a sportswoman, and she has 2 books which have really impacted the way that I look at diet, nutrition, supplementation and training for myself and for my athletes. Her first book is called Raw, and I highly suggest everybody give it a read and take from it the bits that you can apply and that you find useful. She's released another book called Next Level, and that is because she's headed towards menopause, and it's supposed to be a follow-on from Raw, and I'm finding it really, really useful as I deal with my athletes who are aging up, and also I'm aging up, so I'm smack bang in the window for that to be applied, and I'm finding it really, really helpful. I mentioned Stacey Sims and the Wild AI app, so that is something to also consider if you do read any of her studies. All of those studies and all of the information puts out does actually feed back into that Wild AI app. Maisie Hill is another one. I've mentioned her. I stole her visual period tracker right back at the very beginning. She has a couple of books and a podcast out, and I highly recommend it. If you've not read Period Power, Perimenopause Power, or There Will Be Blood, I highly recommend that you get on that. She is not a sportswoman, however, she does like to keep herself fit and healthy, but she comes into it from a very lifestyle based point of view, and it's really informative if you have athletes who struggle with other forms of fertility issues like PMDD or polycystic ovaries. She has great information available on that. Finally, Alyssa Vitti, I did mention her, The Flow Collective, In the Flow. Her book, In the Flow, is fantastic when it comes to lifestyle cycle thinking. Highly recommend ladies to read it. Guys, if you are a male coach, it's probably, you're not going to get as much out of it as a female would reading it. However, it does have great insights into the lifestyle element of it. So if you do want to give it a look over, I highly recommend it. Okay. So adjusting for your physiology starts with tracking. If you take anything away from this seminar today, it's going to be to track. Get your athletes to track their cycle. This is the best way to start a conversation and continue to have conversations with your athletes, is through data. Ask your athletes, if you have female athletes, ask them, do you track your cycle? How do you track your cycle? What do you track? Would you mind sharing your data with me? That then opens the door to them being a little bit more comfortable coming to you and saying, I don't really feel great this session. I think we might have to scale it back a little bit. Or rather than you not understanding why they are finding things more difficult this week than the previous week, this is going to help you out. So all of the good things start with tracking. So hacks. How do we hack our physiology to get the best out of it. What can we do to help our athletes really, really peak? So the early follicular bit, the period, the menstruation over that first 1 to 5 days. So moderate to high intensity workouts and strength training, if they can be tolerated. Nutrition, we're looking at having baseline carbs, high protein, increased fluids, trying to focus on things like lean red meat, leafy green veg, beans, pulses, whole grains. You know, we're looking at making sure that there's plenty of iron and plenty of vitamins B and C being consumed at this time. Mid-follicular, the bit in the run-up to ovulation, the bit where we are all Beyonce and on fire, the bit where you can get your athletes to push that little bit harder and you can ask a little bit more of them than in the first couple of days and especially in the weeks to come. So moderate to high intensity strength or endurance-based training, you can really start ramping this up if your athlete is game. Greater levels of motivation, decreased stress and anxiety. So this really is the time to take advantage of that fire in their belly. Immunity is also likely to be increased at this time. So they're going to rest better, they're going to recover better, they're going to be less likely to get injured or sick. If due to the fluctuation in hormones, so as estrogen is on the rise here, hormone headaches become an issue. For some people they do. 250 milligrams of magnesium. Magnesium supplementation, yes, you can consume it. However, if you do suffer from hormone headaches, this could be a quick, simple and easy option to just add in there. Making sure that vitamin D is kept high as well. So we can get that from salmon, sardines, mushrooms, stuff like that. However, one of the caveats I do have here is we don't get enough vitamin D in the UK at all. Even in really hot countries, the only way to get the right type of vitamin D into our bodies and absorb it in the right way is to have at least 3/4 of our body exposed to direct sunlight for at least 60 minutes every day. Most of the time, we don't do that when the sun is out. We maybe get that when we're on holiday. However, in the UK, when we're all working and the weather's nice, we don't do that. So if that is impossible in the peak of summer, on the days when it's overcast and we don't actually get any direct sunlight, we are not consuming anywhere near the amount of vitamin D that we need. Vitamin D is vital for endocrine system regulation. It affects things like our hormone production, but also our sleep, our stress. So I would recommend everybody, men and women, all take a vitamin D supplement every day, all year round. I certainly do. Ovulatory. Okay, so we're smack in the middle here. We've peaked. High intensity, low volume strength-based training, making sure that we are doing movements and exercise that is going to maximize the anabolic stimulus of estrogen. So, as I say, it's a short window of time. Make the most of it. Really push your athletes. This is the time to be 1 rep max retesting. Caveat there that also they are at greater risk of injury. So I've mentioned the follicle being released from the into the fallopian tube. That luteinizing hormone that enables that to happen has been proved in studies that are coming out of America from studies done on collegiate sport that the luteinizing hormone is now thought to cause a softening of the ligaments and tendons for a short period of time. And studies now show that athletes who are in high impact sport, which have multi-directional changes, so things like running, hockey, anything that requires lots of jumping, that they may change direction quite often and suddenly. ACL tears. So that is a huge raft of studies have come out of collegiate sport in the US over the last couple of years. So something to be very aware of. If you have athletes that are doing lots of bounding at this time, just make sure they're taking care of those knees and ankles. Just something to be aware of. So increasing simple carbs pre-training. So if your athlete is going to be training for over 60 minutes, definitely have intra-carbs. Making sure that your immune system is kept nice and high at this point, because our bodies as women, to try and facilitate potential gestation, we actually turn down the effectiveness of our immune system. So when it comes to ovulation, our bodies turn down how well we fight off infection and recover. So the immune system is slightly depleted at this time. So to help with that, to help support it, it's not going to completely mitigate it, but it is going to assist. 30 to 40 milligrams of zinc and 5 grams of glutamine. That's daily, all the way up to the end of the ovulatory phase and into the luteal. Sometimes it's a good idea, depending on what your immune system and immunity is like, to take it all the way up to day 1 again. So mid-luteal, immediately after ovulation, this is the time that maybe adaptations are going to have to be made where we reduce the intensity and output. Moving more towards steady state or endurance training, making sure leucine-rich protein is consumed post-training. So this is when we're looking at making sure we get high tryptophan foods in and fast. So the post-workout shake is a really good shout at this time. Making sure we have plenty of antioxidants to flush through all of those hormones that are now raging about. Cold water immersion. I mention this because our body temperature is still slightly raised and is on the way down. In summer, this is a really important factor. So women are really poor at vasoconstriction. We are vasodilators. That's why when a woman starts exercising, usually her face will flush pink, and even 10 to 15 minutes after exercise, her face will still remain pink. And that's because all of our blood is still at the surface. We have a problem with overheating quite a lot. So cold water immersion can be really helpful to assist with vasoconstriction. Now, we don't all have cold water submersion tanks available. We certainly don't carry them around in our boot. If you do, hats off to you. So ways that we can help do this. How can we help our athletes cool down? Simple things like, if you do have cold water immersion available, get in there, get a cold shower, put a cold water bottle or a bag of peas, something frozen on the back of the neck, anything to try and cool down some of those extremities and get the blood back into the body and away from the surface. Okay, so making sure that we keep vitamin D high, taking extra BCAAs, so that could be intra during our workout or immediately after, and B6. B6 is a really good way of helping fight some of those PMS symptoms. I would recommend taking a supplement for that if PMS does become an issue. If it is something that you deal with on a month-to-month basis and it can be quite extreme, taking a vitamin B complex can assist with that in some ways. Okay, so late luteal, here we are, right towards the end. Now what we are looking at is being laid on the sofa with a hot water ball sometimes. Not all the time, but I think we've all been there once or twice or witnessed it in somebody else. So this is the time when we may really have to consider doing low to moderate intensity training, really focusing on more technical things. So switching towards Olympic lifting technique, or really honing our craft rather than ramping up intensity or going hard. Keeping protein high pre-training, starchy carbs post-training, intra-carbs if we need them because we're training for longer than 60 minutes, making sure that our focus is on good sleep hygiene. So no caloric restriction as sleep quality is reduced. Going to sleep hungry is only going to disturb your sleep. So at this point, if you are extra hungry, slip into maintenance. It's the best way. You want to be more recovered. It will help you in the long run. Immunity, again, still could be lowered. Stress and anxiety also adds to that. PMS symptoms. This is fun, fun, fun city. So this is the time that we have to be quite generous with ourselves and really look at being on top of diet, nutrition and supplementation as much as we don't want to, as much as we just want to sit on the sofa under a blanket eating dairy milk. That's not going to help us. Things like making sure we keep omega-3s, taking the right type of omega-3 if we are supplementing and not eating them. Keeping up with the zinc if you are a little bit crampy and a little bit achy, taking 80 milligrams of baby aspirin, as well as keeping vitamin D in there. Okay, so what happens as we age up? I've saved this towards the end because, you know, it happens to us all. So if you have female athletes that are heading into their 40s, this is a potentially useful bit of information. So when a woman enters perimenopause, it can be a long period. It can be a long part of their life. So premenstrual, before the period, most girls by the time they get to 14 then get their period. Sometimes it can be earlier, sometimes it can be later, but that's the general average. And then the fertile period can last anything up to late 30s, early 40s, sometimes into the late 40s. It's different for everybody. Everybody knows, or should know, thanks to Davina McCall and the wonderful work of Louise Newsom being all over the TV and the radio, menopause. It's a word that we're no longer afraid to say and we can openly discuss. Menopause is one day, just one day, exactly 12 months after our last period. So what then is perimenopause? If that's just one day, perimenopause is that period of change before that. And how long is that? How long is a piece of string? It can be anywhere from 2 years to 12 years. Quite the time frame. So this is why all of this getting to know our bodies is really important, because we have to know how our bodies work and what we're dealing with and how to work with ourselves for a large part of our adult life. And then we have to also be able to identify when our body is changing, because we spend all these years getting to know ourselves and we're like, yep, my body works like clockwork. And then all of a sudden it goes, no, I don't. Ta-da! Perimenopause. So when a woman enters perimenopause, she becomes a little bit more carb sensitive. So the need for adequate carbs is more important than ever. Sorry to break this to any ladies listening who are of that age, but that basically means we don't process sugars quite as well and in the same way. So we have to focus on low glycemic foods, which are high in fibre. So less chocolate and wine, more kale and spinach. I'm so sorry. It doesn't mean none, it just means a little bit more moderation and balance. So training and nutrition in accordance with cycle synchronisation can become more challenging, but this is why making the effort with tracking early on and being consistent with it is really, really important, because it pays dividends during perimenopause, because we're able to track all of this. There are so many benefits to being in perimenopause and tracking symptoms, as well as far as getting treatment when it comes to menopause and HRT, which is an entirely different subject, but there is more and more information out there as time goes on. Okay, so women are not meant to suffer. They are meant to thrive, and being able to synchronise with their cycle is 110% key. So to sum up, training can be adjusted. Relative perception of RPE is one of the best ways to do it. So ask your client, ask yourself, how does this feel today? Does this feel like it's a solid 8 out of 10 effort, but you are absolutely smashing it? And then you go back in a couple of weeks later and try and move the same weight, and it feels like a 9.5 out of 10 and you want to cry. That's the difference in RPE. So ask, talk about it. Nutrition, it can be adapted. It's all about having knowledge of where you are in your cycle, or where your athlete is in their cycle, and being able to compensate and tweak and make room for the various bits of movement that need to occur to keep everybody on track. Supplementation. There is times when supplementation is 110% necessary, and other times when you can get away with using diet and nutrition to help with that. It's an entirely personal thing. As I say, if you have vegan athletes, this is something where supplementation may very well need to be relied on quite heavily, but it's something that can be tweaked and it can be discussed. Just remember that everybody is a case study of one. So what works with one athlete may not necessarily work with all athletes, and that's the importance of sharing the data. So I hope everybody's taken something from this that's useful. I'm gonna stop recording now, and I am gonna open up to a Q&A. So if anybody's got any questions or anything like that, you have the option of using the chat box, or you can put your hand up and I will unmute you and we can have a conversation. I've allocated about 15 to 20 minutes to get through this. So if you guys want to hang around, fantastic. And if you don't, absolutely no problems. I shall let you hop off.